refreshments, and Misty Community Church for providing the other part of our refreshments. So please feel free to enjoy those throughout the rest of the day when we have our breaks. I enjoyed that break. Did you like the break? When you were in school, didn't you always look forward to breaks? I did. Recess? I still do. Yes. We're going to have Sergeant Ortega hopefully join us back here in just a moment. I think he's making his way now, at least I hope. And I want to take this time just to introduce our panelists. And I'm going to do that now, so if you'll just bear with me. First of all, I want to introduce you to Felix and Lora. Felix was born and raised in a small town in the Dominican Republic. He came to the U.S. in the early 1990s to pursue higher education. He received a bachelor's degree in marketing and management from Kennesaw State University and a master's in divinity from the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. While serving as a youth leader in his local Hispanic church, he developed a passion to see more Latino students obtain their high school diplomas and pursue higher education. Nicknamed the Pied Piper by the reporter newspapers, Felix has provided a brighter future to countless children through the Sandy Springs Mission, an organization that focuses on dropout prevention among children of foreign-born parents. Under his leadership in 2013, the Sandy Springs Mission was selected as the year's most outstanding organization in the area of education for Latino students. Felix was named the City of Sandy Springs Humanitarian, the highest award given by the city to someone who exemplifies the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. Felix serves on the board for the Good Samaritan Clinic at West Cobb, as well as for 2 local public schools. He is involved in mission work abroad with his church and lives in Marietta with his wife and their son. Please welcome Felix Lora. So I met Felix for the first time over a burger at Moxie Burger. Never had one of those. They're really good, and he likes a good burger, and so do I. We also like fries. And so do the McCords, by the way. They enjoy a good burger. How many of you enjoy a good burger? Most of you enjoy it? Yes. We're going to show you a video a little bit later about a homeless lady who receives a burger. And man, she's just ecstatic about receiving that burger. I get that way when I receive a good burger. So that was my feeling as I was feeling as we waited for Sergeant Ortega to be here. And before I introduce Sergeant Ortega to you, I just want you to be in prayer for him and his family. He had an uncle that was involved in an explosion and was severely burned. The uncle is improving and getting better, but that caused him to need to leave the country for a while. And we're thankful that he's back and that his uncle is doing better. So continue to remember his uncle in your prayers, if you would. So I'm going to introduce Sergeant Ortega, Salvador Ortega. He attended Armstrong Atlantic State University, now known as Georgia Southern University, where he earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science and political theory. His law enforcement career began in 2005, and in 2009 he became an officer with the Sandy Springs Police Department. He now is a sergeant and currently a public information officer with the Community Affairs Division. He goes by Sal, by the way, if you didn't know that. Sal has more than 14 years of law enforcement experience, including uniform patrol, field training officer, criminal investigations, public information officer, crisis negotiations team, computer forensics, and criminal intelligence. During his many years as an officer, Sergeant Ortega has interviewed several homeless citizens in an effort to better understand this very complex issue. Sergeant Ortega understands the value and importance of education and believes this to be a never-ending journey. He currently attends the University of North Georgia, where he is scheduled to graduate this month with a master's degree in criminal justice. Please welcome Sergeant Salvador. I appreciate Sal and his friendship. He's been involved in several things we've done here at First Baptist Church at Misty Creek, including our 9/11 Remembrance Service. He's been a part of that with us for the last 2 years and getting word out to the community about these special events. We appreciate his service. Now I want to introduce you to Rebecca Cranford. We call her Beck. Beck's commitment to be a lifelong learner and servant leader started early in her career with AmeriCorps, where she led a family literacy project and helped coordinate a rural transportation program in eastern Texas. Her insight on leadership development, practical theology, homelessness, advocacy, and the nonprofit world comes from years of unique experiences throughout America and the world. Beck received her BA in Biblical Theology and Practical Theology and Missions at Southeastern University in Lakeland, Florida, and her MDiv from the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary in 2013. Beck cares deeply about those that society has rejected and those that religiosity and other systems of power continue to alienate. Beck focuses on ecumenical unity, interfaith justice work, and humanitarian endeavors in her spare time, speaking at many events and conferences, as well as training in the ministry of presence for churches and ministries. Her commitment to the marginalized intensified after Beck began studying theology. Beck currently serves as the Director of Community Engagement at Gateway Center. We are delighted to have her be a part of our panel today. Please welcome Beck. Beck gave a few of us a tour of the Gateway Center a few weeks ago, and she did a fabulous job, and she was very transparent with us as she shared her story with us, and she may end up sharing some of that today, but she is a wonderful person and certainly has a calling to work with folks, especially those that are going through difficult and struggling times. So thank you for being here. And now Renée Howze is with us. Renée is a native of North Carolina and was raised in Columbia, South Carolina. Another South Carolinian is with us in the building. Yay! Where she obtained a Bachelor of Social Work degree from Benedict College. She moved to Atlanta to further her education and obtained her Master of Social Work degree from Clark Atlanta University. Renée has worked in the mental health and the addictive disorders field since 1998. She has worked passionately for over 22 years to serve and assist in removing housing barriers for the homeless population, as well as individuals and families at risk of homelessness. Renée is a seasoned professional with diversified experience providing program management within a variety of settings that include emergency shelter and transitional housing programs, outreach, and years of case management services. Renée spends her free time with her husband, their 16-year-old son, and 14-year-old daughter, doing volunteer work with her sorority and activities within Beulah, remember Beulah Land? Beulah Missionary Baptist Church. Please welcome Renée to our panel. So at this point, we are now in, section 2, what resources exist, and our panelists are going to talk with us and discuss with you and answer questions and just comment on the resources, intake processes, and why do homeless not always want to go to shelters. And so we're going to just kind of let them have an open forum here and talk with us about there's certain resources, and I'll share a couple of those, and then they're just going to take this and run with it. So faith-based versus government-funded shelters, day shelters versus overnight shelters versus emergency shelters, treatment centers and non-treatment centers, differences between city, county, and state providers. They can provide a lot of information there for us. How are shelters funded? Why are there so many? Do they all work together, or is each one independent? And they can shed a lot of light on that. The intake process, maybe you've always wanted to know that. The intake requirements and the intake documents and the paperwork that exists. Barriers to entering a shelter, like children and lack of documents, and whether you have a social security card and all those kind of things. Pets, addictions. So those are some of the things that they're going to address, and I'm going to turn it over to them.
I'm going to defer to Felix and see if he can give us an overview of North Fulton and Sandy Springs, kind of, because I need to know.
Yes. So we do not have a shelter in Sandy Springs. So organization like our organization, I think you can hear me, right? But maybe. So we do not have a shelter, homeless shelter in Sandy Springs, so we have to refer our clients and people in need to one of the shelter downtown, someone else. One of the things that I think that Sandy Springs has, I work with Latino families in the area, so one of the things that we had noticed happening is that there is what we call multiple families living in the same apartment. And so they provide, our family provide kind of support in themselves to help out. The other thing that I was about to jump in some of the question earlier, we had not seen a lot of homelessness because some of the, in 2020, because there were some laws that were preventing people from being evicted. And some organizations like Sandwich Mission had to jump in and help with rent assistance and things like that. So we were at it to prevent homelessness. So that is the status in North Fulton and especially Sandy Springs, is that we have organizations like ours. We get the phone calls every time just because of the name, Sandy Springs Mission. We get the phone call and the messages, hey, do you have any room available? And so we had to refer them to some of the homeless shelters that we know.
For me, I just wanted to kind of share with you all a little bit about the question, the difference between how the shelters get funded and kind of how are resources available, and pretty much how are individuals connected to those particular resources. So the first thing I want to start off by explaining is emergency shelter, of course, is a temporary housing placement, but there's a couple of different what they call housing solutions. So maybe you'll start at one point and you're kind of moving around. And so of those particular housing resources that I know that Beck and myself kind of work within is emergency shelters. They're generally temporary housing that can last anywhere from like 2 weeks, some programs that can last anywhere from 90 days. Again, some programs based on the situation with COVID, they were able to kind of extend the timeline because we realized we really and truly have to be able to meet the current needs of individuals. But to start off, how do people access these shelters? And so I can speak from Hope Atlanta, the program that I currently work with. We have a very big outreach presence. And that means they have actually skilled social service providers. And I'm gonna say this word, peer support specialists. That means individuals who may have previously been homeless, individuals who may be struggling with mental health or a history of addiction. So they sometimes know where to go look for individuals, know how to connect with them, and not to come across like, you need to come with me, but actually be able to take time and talk to them. And a lot of times, y'all, something as simple as bringing a meal can honestly help lower the anxiety of an individual when they're either sleeping on a bridge, in the park, just different places. Because a lot of times, I think the stigma of, well, why do you want to be out here? Kind of stands out. But what's important to understand is, I think it was the sentiments were explained and expressed in the videos that was shown. We're human, and that's the one connection we have with everybody. So regardless of their situation or what brought them there, sometimes it's just trying to connect with another human being. And so something as simple as bringing a meal. You're not gonna be able to solve all their problems, but if you could at least get them to open up and try to connect and engage. And so from my conversation, I'll mention Deidre McCrae. She is our outreach director at Hope Atlanta. And what she has explained and kind of shared in conversations, because I've met her even outside of her role, she's a genuinely passionate individual who really works with her team about trying to connect with people. So it's about relationship building. So yeah, all the years of experience and knowledge from education, but a lot of several things is about how to connect with people. Just how to be present in the moment and non-judgmental. So just understanding from that outreach standpoint, a lot of times, and I've received calls before where churches, like, they want to help, but they have people that are individuals that are just out there consistently. I had one particular call where an individual was literally sleeping by their bus, but they needed to move the bus, but they had accumulated all their things. So just understanding how to connect without being harsh without being disrespectful, but at the same time also being able to be a service. And so they were able to reach out to the outreach department and then kind of connect to see how they were able to get people out there. So I just want to kind of single point go back to when you're dealing with emergency shelters, a lot of times the outreach workers can bring individuals into emergency shelters. But being able to connect with a genuine, interest to want to help people is a really good quality in terms of anybody, whether you're a service provider or just an individual that sees someone and you want to see how you can help them. Another housing solution is rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is a resource that is pretty much taken away in the last few years. And what rapid rehousing is, true to its name, it is a short-term rental assistance that pretty much allows individuals who just need a little bit of help. They've gone through either short-term job loss or different type situations, but just can't put all the money together to be able to pay that big deposit, pay those utility deposits, and then be able to need a little cushion for the first couple of months. And so rapid rehousing is a big way that we get a lot of funding for in terms of nonprofit and other different agencies that offer that service. And then it's important because they get case management. So not only are you providing meeting a financial need, but you're able to provide them that support. So the case management can include if they're work ready, but just don't have the resources like transportation, need some clothing so that they can actually be job interview prepared and those kind of things. And just working with them on how to present themselves and reintegrate back into the work community if they've been struggling with unemployment. Because one of the main things I know that Beck and probably you all understand, it's a term called housing first. What that basically means, you all, is it's a basic human right that everyone deserves housing. But now we have federal government that are saying if you want to get funding, you have to show as low barrier that you want to help people. And so that means we want to help you get into housing. So that means the agency that has the funding for rapid rehousing, they're going to assist you even if you don't have a job. And I know that's a challenge because you have apartments, even before COVID, but especially now during COVID, they're like, how are we going to get our rent paid? How long are you going to be working with this particular individual or family? But we have to work and negotiate relationships so that we can actually have resources to connect these families and individuals to. So just trying to share that there's a lot of things out there that are designed to help, but we have to find that connection so that we can assist those individuals in actually being able to access that resource and being able to support them during the transition while we're trying to help them. Because ultimately we want them to be able to not only obtain affordable housing, but sustain. And so that's a key point. And then I also want to speak briefly about permanent supportive housing. That is another housing solution that's more long-term. And so hopefully throughout the day we'll get a chance to talk about, because I know Christine mentioned speaking about homelessness. There's also two different types. You have an individual who may be chronically homeless. That means on top of not only struggling with having a safe place to lay your head, you're also dealing with some type of physical or behavioral life issues called a disability. And so the difference from just being homeless, meaning you were evicted the night before, or you lost your job, or whatever may have happened, you had a family dispute and you got kicked out. A chronically homeless individual is someone who's been homeless for a period of 12 consecutive months, or over a 3-year period, they've had 4 different episodes of where they've been without stable housing. So that means I've tried, got housing, then tried again, or something happened, then tried again. So can you imagine how they're down on themselves? Plus they may be dealing with some type of physical or emotional or any type of issue. So again, I'm just giving you a quick glimpse of the different housing options that are available in terms of resources. Of course, there are a number of programs, but we can explain that a little, go into it a little bit more. I just wanted to share with you what the different options and resources are. Okay? So, good question. Where would Welcome House fall? Welcome House is actually a permanent supportive housing program. And so, who we serve at Welcome House is single adults who have a documented disability and have been homeless, considered chronically homeless. So that means not only have they been struggling with their disability, they also have been homeless for a very long period of time. Gotcha, I apologize. I'll repeat that real quick. So the Welcome House is known as a permanent supportive housing program. And so what that means is we actually serve those who are considered chronically homeless and individuals with a documented disability. But the good thing about that is because we also have, and I'll just share a little bit about it if you don't mind. Welcome House is a program that's located in the city of Atlanta, and that is a connection that we have in partnership with a property management company, nonprofit called 3 Keys, and then we as Hope Atlanta serve as the actual on-site social service provider. So that means not only they get long-term permanent housing, but they get support in their residence. So although they can come in without zero income, because we get government funding for a couple of different programs, it allows us to assist them while they're working towards either acquiring income, because I'll say about 80% of our population meet the definition to receive government benefits like Social Security, SSI, and SSDI. But it doesn't mean that they automatically get it. It's an application process. And so we as the case management on site, we connect with them to provide resources to assist them. And we do have a small percentage that are able to work, and they're able to go out and have part-time employment and be able to sustain. So that program, again, is a permanent supportive housing model. It's not the only type, because some of them are in actual apartments, but that is a community shared environment. Okay?
First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone that came and everyone that is watching us online. Can you guys hear me? Okay. This is a very complex topic to understand. A lot of people have a misconception. And as I always say, I describe it as this is not a one-size-fits-all problem. There's so many, as we mentioned, there's those people that are chronic homeless, that they have been homeless for many years. There's homeless that will lose their jobs, they go through financial issues, and overnight they find themselves without a home. Let's talk about the shelters. Earlier I said that Sandy Springs Police, we go out, we try to connect with the homeless in the area, we try to know who they are, we try to learn their story. Everyone, all of them have an interesting story to tell. And part of that is to count them, to know who they are, and also we provide them with a guide of resources available to them that includes shelters, includes places where they can get clothing, they can get food, and these are both nonprofit, they're governmental and religious agencies. And what we have learned is that a lot of the homeless that are, I guess, in the chronic stage homelessness, some of them have told us they refuse to go to a shelter. We ask why, and just like us, they have needs, they have wants, and one of the needs is safety. As we know, they don't have a lot of belongings, but some of their experiences at shelters, they have gotten their stuff stolen, their socks, their shoes stolen. So some of the homeless that we encounter, they just simply refuse to go to the shelters. And it's something that we see almost on a daily basis from citizens with the right heart. They'll call 911 when they see somebody that looks like a homeless person on the street, on a bench. They call us and they say, hey, there's this homeless person. Can you send an officer so they can take him to a shelter? 99% of the time, we know who they're talking about because we know our homeless. We have established a good rapport, and we know that they just don't want to go. Just like all of us, they have constitutional rights that if they don't want to go willingly, we can't force them to go. We can't just put them in the car and drive them away. Being homeless is not a crime. So I do. Other people have reached out to me and say, how can I help I see homeless all over the place, but what can I do to help? Can I give them money? Yeah, that's an option if you want to give them money. But there's many other options if you don't feel comfortable. There's, I don't know if it's a myth, but a lot of people say, I don't give money because they'll buy drugs, because they'll buy beer. Well, there's been some research studies that say that I think 94% of the money that homeless get is used towards food, clothing, actual stuff to survive. But some people might not feel comfortable giving them money. So they ask me, what can I give them? Well, you can give them gift cards to either a restaurant or just a Visa gift card. But one of the things that I have learned that the homeless, they always welcome socks. If you have a pair of socks new, give it to the homeless. They walk all day, and that's the one thing that I know that they ask for, new pair of socks. So I ask people, if you want to help, just either you can give us, if you don't feel comfortable interacting with somebody, just bring socks, and that's it. And I've had people bring bags of socks, so we go out, we hand the socks out, and they love the socks. It's comfort, and they walk all day. Another thing is hygiene items, soap, toothbrushes, toothpaste, toilet paper. That's just basic necessities that you and I will need. So we do have a lot of our citizens, they're concerned, they just don't know how to help, and this is why I was so happy when I learned about today, because we know that information and education is power, and it helps eliminate some of the misconceptions about the homeless. So I'm very excited to be here. Let me see if I have anything else. So some of the homeless that we have, we love having a rapport with them. They have a story to tell. Some of the stories have been fascinating. I've met homeless that have been professional athletes in the past, soccer players, football players, and I've met one doctor that became homeless. And their stories are similar. They had to do with the drug problem, but that led them to living in the streets. So that, to me, it's a reminder that it can happen to any one of us. It doesn't matter what background you have. It doesn't matter if you're famous or if we have money. That can happen at any given time to one of us or a loved one. And something that we should all remember is that these homeless are human. They have dignity. They should be respected. They're already going through a lot, and we look at it as if they're not worth. We just put them deeper in their hole. So if you have a chance, if you see a homeless person on a regular basis, and you feel comfortable, just start a conversation with them, learn their story, because they all have a story, and you'll be amazed of how they ended up where they are. So that's what I have for this section. So thank you.
Thanks. Hey, I'm going to touch on a couple different things. First of all, shout out to Pastor Mitch. If you have nothing to be thankful for today, you can thank the God or universe or whatever it is that you love for Sherman toilet paper. Can somebody say amen? That's what I'm talking about. I was like, man, he pulled out all the stops today. Sergeant Ortega mentioned something that's super important. He's talking about dignity and love, and I think we can love every person, and that's what we need to be about, and that's what we need to be doing. And many of you who are here today come from a faith base, and many of you are Christ followers. I know the Christian church doesn't necessarily have a track record of loving, but Christ always did. And Jesus walked in love, and we're called to love. I was reminding my child of that the other day, and I said, we have to love everybody, Marley. And she said, yes, ma'am, Mama, especially the idiots who don't use turn signals. And I was like, great. She's listening to everything I say. One of the questions that was asked is, what's the difference between faith-based organizations and government-based organizations? Well, there are minimal of government-based organizations, government-based shelters. The city of Atlanta only operates one government shelter, and that is the cold weather overflow. That's the only thing that the city operates. Now, there are many funding agencies and funding streams that come in that go out to nonprofits, and you will find that most of all of these nonprofits were founded with faith. So when we look at like Zabon Couples Shelter, when we look at the Temple who's serving, when we look at the 14th Street Mosque, when we look at Covenant House, when we look at Hope Atlanta, when we look at Mercy Care, when we look at the Gateway Center, we find out that many of these organizations came about because of faith. There are some specifically faith organizations that do not cooperate in the city of Atlanta with the continuum of care. And some of these agencies may require that someone accepts a God as their personal savior in order to receive a sandwich. Now, I'm no Bible scholar. Well, actually, I am. Jesus never did that. Why do we do that? And one thing I will tell you is I have 8 years of advanced theological education. Got little letters behind my name. Read the Bible in Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic. But I don't know anything about God compared to my friends who are experiencing homelessness. The things that they could teach me about God if I could humble myself. I've run into so many people over the years that get so excited and so hungry, and they just want to share the love of God with the homeless. As if the homeless needed to be saved. Because we think we have something to offer. Because oftentimes we come with materialism, and we have things, and we have a bank account, and we have a zip code. But we're blinded by our own idolatries of materialism and consumerism. And our friends who are experiencing homelessness have a deep and often prophetic relationship with the divine. You don't know how many times that I've walked in thinking that I'm going to bless someone, and they bless my socks off. I was diagnosed barren many years ago, and I was walking through a dark alleyway at 5 a.m. in the city of Atlanta, and you're like, why would you do that? Well, I'm a large, tattooed Pentecostal woman that speaks in tongues, so I'm And this woman ruffled these blankets, and these blankets began to move, and she came out and she grabbed my hand, and she began to pray for me, and I wasn't frightened, but I was startled. And she sat there and she said, the Lord will open up your womb. And I was like, who is this woman? And what's she doing talking about my womb? Let's not talk about that. And I said, thank you, ma'am, and I went on. And I didn't think anything more about it. I just kind of was like, yeah, whatever, you know. And later, I conceived at 40 years of age after being diagnosed barren for all my life. I have a 3.5-year-old now. I never saw that woman ever again. People who are experiencing homelessness know and rely on God often more times than we do people who are inside religious institutions. Next thing I wanted to talk about, how are things funded? Well, a variety of ways. Some people are like, is everything government heavy? No, government shifts and moves and ebbs and flows. Like, we can't count on government funding. Every agency is trying to diversify their funding, trying to get individual donors to give monthly. Like, you give to your church, you give to a missions agency, you give to the Anarchist Society of Quilters. Maybe not. But you give. And so every agency is trying to diversify their funding. Some funding comes through grants and foundations. Companies that you know and love and that you trust. Companies like Publix, Home Depot, Coca-Cola. These corporations give money. There's money out there to be had. So when we talk about funding, not everything is government funded. Treatment centers versus non-treatment centers. Now here's a tricky question with this. Oftentimes you will encounter someone who is ready to go into a shelter, but they need a facility to detox. It is difficult to find a facility for someone who is uninsured or underinsured. But there are some facilities that work on that on a case-by-case scenario. Whether it's Ridgeview, whether it's DeKalb Crisis Center, right? Whether it's Willowbrook, sometimes they will take someone who is underinsured or not insured to detox. Once that person has completed detox, then they would be eligible to go into a 12-step program, a recovery program, a program for sobriety and clean living, where they learn healthy coping mechanisms, right? Where they deal with those adverse childhood effects. What happened to them when they were a child? Oftentimes a misconception in America about homelessness is, well, someone who's experiencing homelessness is that way because they choose to be that way. Well, sometimes, but mostly you will find beautiful humans created in the image of God that have suffered tremendously in their own home, in the streets, and even by our systems and institutions. So we have to move away from judging people and saying that it is their own fault, right? It could be a mix. I know none of you have ever made bad decisions. I look at you today and you're super holy. You've never messed up your life in any way. Never done anything that you're regretted. But we all have. And we have to give more opportunity and more grace to those who are experiencing homelessness. All right, the next thing, and I'll end with this. I know it's time for question and answers. I think I got that. Oh, barriers to enter a shelter. Let's talk about that briefly. So there's a lot of different barriers for someone to enter a shelter. Some shelters require an ID. If I want to get an ID in the state of Georgia, what do I need? 5 forms of ID. Right? Now there are agencies that are set up to help persons get birth certificates, to be able to get driver's license, to be able to get these sort of requirements and these documentations. But if I'm outside and someone steals my book bag, what do I do? Or if I'm incarcerated and my things are held in a locker and I come back to the locker and it's been given away, or it was left in the emergency room, what do I do? So those are barriers. Identification. Children is a barrier to get into shelter. And you're like, why would children be a barrier to get into shelter? If I'm a mom of 3 and I have these 3 kids, and let's say it's summertime and there's not school, what am I going to do with my 3 children as I try to navigate the shelter system? As I try to go to an agency that said that they were going to open up at 9 o'clock, maybe their intake starts at 10 o'clock, I still have to figure out how I'm going to feed these kids and keep them occupied while we walk 2 miles to a bus stop, and then get off that bus stop, transfer to another bus, and then go to a shelter. And then by the time I arrive, it might be too late for intake. So children sometimes can be difficult to get to a shelter, difficult to navigate. There are resources available through DECAL, through the Department of Early and Childhood Education, where mothers can get assistance for emergency child care. But as you all remember in the pandemic, what happened to child care? It went away. So these are barriers. There's many more barriers to different facilities that I haven't named, but those are just a few to get the conversation started. I think we're at time for our Q&A. We have 10 minutes. Can I keep talking? Okay, because I'm a narcissist. I like the sound of my own voice, so I will keep talking. Okay, let's go back. Let's see if there's anything that I missed here. Actually, let me pass the microphone. We'll do that. I know we got too much stuff to add.
Yeah, one of the issues that we have in Santa Springs is that most of the people that we serve, the Santa Springs Mission, they do not have or do not qualify for a Social Security number. And they cannot get an ID, so therefore they don't qualify to be taken in some of the homeless shelters. The other one, the other group that I want to mention is those that were mentioned earlier in the hidden homeless, and that's what I work with. a lot of the students, do you know that if your child, when they go to high school, most likely, or middle school, they're sitting right next to somebody who is homeless? Do you know that? So they estimate that 40% of the homeless in the United States are under the age of 18. And so I discovered that about 5 years ago, as I went to a high school and I'm meeting with a counselor about some of his children that had run in the mission, in science mission. And they mentioned one name, and when I talked to them about, they told me that she was homeless. But she was living in school. And I mean, she was attending school. And one of the challenges she was having was just getting to school, transportation. She was living in Cap County, but still she was attending one of the local high schools. So I encourage you to go to the high school and say, how can I help those students who are homeless? See, I want to also touch base on the faith-based, and I'm going to look at faith-based versus government. I'm going to look at the nonprofit as a whole, and I think both of you are related to it. When you work in a nonprofit that is faith-based, you're looking to build up the person, the family, to be self-sufficient. So you're going to work at it from the perspective that everybody was made in the image of God, and that every soul, everybody can be restored. So you go from that perspective. But what we notice working in the nonprofit world is that sometimes some of those other organizations will create dependency. And so we're looking, I think, that usually nonprofits who are away from the government are creating self-sufficiency, which is one of the main differences, I think, when you look at those, when you compare both of them. And so the other difference, I think, is that we're looking for the root cause. What is the root of the problem? And address that. Rather than just making people stay in the same cycle.
So to mention a couple of other barriers to housing, getting into emergency shelters, when Becky touched on about just having a large family or just trying to keep your kids together, keep them busy, another piece to add to it is the age of your children. Unfortunately, some shelters do actually have an age requirement where you have to have a child that's either 12 or younger. You're talking about a male child. But can you imagine if you're a mom with a 16-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and you have to make a choice, do I house myself and my 2 younger kids? What do I do with my 16-year-old child? And so that's a very bad, uncomfortable place to be in. I'm thankful that the program that I work within, we're able to take families as they present. And so going back to housing first, that means you lower all the barriers as much as possible to help keep that family and household intact. Another thing to consider is transportation. Where is the program and the facility located? Because if they're not close on MARTA, or if that individual doesn't have MARTA resources, and there's not an outreach van or an outreach team that's able to pick up and transport, that can become a barrier for them even getting to the shelter. So there's a couple of different other issues, like I just wanted to add to what Beth was mentioning, and I also wanted to add about some of the resources that I know that we've referred to in this particular area. How many of you all are familiar with Family Promise? That's a program in this area that offers services to families and meals and so forth. And then also North Fulton Charities. You all familiar with that program as well? So these are some that I know that's in this general area that can also service and provide support to individuals that present as homeless. But it's just good to know that sometimes you may just have to offer a MARTA card or transportation to help a person get to those resources. So it's good to know that Officer Sal was saying that they give out the actual listing of resources, but knowledge is power, but access can also be a barrier. And just understanding how you can be equipped to help that individual. It's not always about putting money in a person's hand, as it is it's just trying to help them. Someone mentioned a gift card. It's also looking at just a meal. just something as simple and basic, and just let them know that this too shall pass. It doesn't have to last. And I do want to touch on this one thing. As we come about an encounter and want to help others, I've heard this a lot of different meetings I've been in. Well, sometimes, and this isn't to be negative, it's just to be very honest and transparent. When you're genuinely trying to meet and connect with people, realizing that you can't solve all their issues, but just being open to wanting to help, and sometimes just listening to them when they need to speak, to discuss what they're going on. And you may not be able to help with the housing immediately, but maybe you can connect them to a food pantry, and that's still a need that you're able to meet. And so don't get sometimes afraid that you don't want to, encounter a person because you don't feel like you can really solve all their issues. Sometimes just being there and being present in the moment, I think is valuable when you work with people. Okay? Thank you.
So we have 5 minutes. I'm a person who is formerly homeless. I do happen to have a master's in divinity and currently teach at Candler School of Theology. I'm 8 generations from West Georgia, and for those of you not familiar with West Georgia, I grew up with a lot of taxidermy, camouflage, and King James Version of the Bible. My father was the big-haired guy who said, "Come on, everybody, it's time to praise the Lord." And we were in church all the time, like 700 million hours a day and more. So, and some bad stuff happened to me in church because in the 80s in Douglasville, we didn't background check people who were coming to work in our church with their children. So some really bad stuff happened to me, and I began to act out. I know you look at me today and think that I could never act out or be rebellious or snarky. It's true, I'm a new creature in Christ. I was hella pissed about what happened to me as a child, so I began to act out and really rebel. I decided to express myself in a butch swagger, if that makes sense, so more masculine, dressing in boys' clothes. I was very much a tomboy, and also I was very gothy. And growing up in Douglasville, you could dress in Carhartt or Abercrombie, so the goth thing didn't work very well with my Pentecostal community, as you might imagine. Anyways, me and my father got into it, and he told the church that I was a practicing Satanist and a lesbian. And despite the fact that I owned a truck, I was not actually a lesbian. But I got in my truck and drove to Little 5 Points, which is located in Atlanta. And those of you who are longtime Metro Atlanteans will remember that that once was our bohemian kind of area. It is now over-commercialized and gentrified. But I went there and I met Rastafarians and people with pink hair and green hair and punks and gay folks, people who just loved me and embraced me. And I hated Christianity. I was done with it. I was like, you guys are idiots. And I was mad. I experienced very privileged homelessness on the streets of Atlanta. I eventually met a guy named Isaac. My name is Rebecca. I thought it was providential. We started hanging out. Did a lot of things I'm not very proud of. Quickly became a drug dealer in the city of Atlanta in which I sold MDMA, otherwise known as ecstasy. I was in the rave scene for a long time. Some of you are like, what's a rave? It's a place like Pac-Man where you're in a dark rave with blinking lights and you run around eating pills. So that's what a rave is. Anyway, so we did that for a while. I ended up overdosing at the age of 25. I had a near-death experience, and in those moments I just cried out and I said, Jesus, if you're real, save me, I will give you my life. And I saw a Jesus. Could have been the drugs. I mean, just being honest. Looks a little bit more like Bob Marley and Captain Jack Sparrow than the white guy hanging in the Methodist church. Just throwing that out there. Like I said, it could have been the drugs. But I decided to go back to church. I had green hair, tattoos, stretched ears, and piercings, and all my clothes made me look like a very angry My Little Pony. So when I walked into church, it was a time in America when everyone was dropping denominations and, changing their name to like the Church of blah, 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 or Journey, or River, right? So it was that time in America. I walked in very snarky, certainly sure that Christians were going to judge me. They had greeters with coffee, and they were like, hi, welcome. And I was like, I've read enough to know not to drink anything that Christians offer you. I read about that thing, and yeah, Jim Jones, yeah. So I didn't. I was very just mad and angry when I went in, but I knew that the Lord had saved me. And I felt convicted during the sermon. And I ran to the altar, and a large woman grabbed me and shoved me in between her massive bosoms and said, "Baby, don't you know Jesus loves you?" It could have been the oxygen deprivation, but I had a warming of heart. So God loved me. What do I do with that? I left Georgia because nobody wants to be in this hellhole. That's what I thought. And I went to seminary, and I felt God was calling me back when I went to Memphis, and I sat at the Lorraine Motel. And I read the words of Dr. King, and being an 8th-generation Appalachian, Scotch-Irish white person, I was told that Dr. King was a rebel-rouser. But when I read his words, I saw that he was a prophet and a New Testament theologian, and that the church wasn't doing enough for people that had been on the margins. And I was convicted. So I came back to Georgia, and I said, "I'll do whatever you want, God." So I cleaned toilets for a long time, and then I got the job at the Gateway Center, and I've been there for almost 10 years. It is Atlanta's largest homeless service agency, and it is a place of love and restoration, and a lot of funny stories that are inappropriate for me to share here. Thanks.
Questions and answers. Questions, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So again, we just open the floor. Based on anything that you've heard here, if you just want to hear more or kind of, ask a question or ask us to touch on something that we didn't mention, please do so at this time. Yes, ma'am.
When you're talking about the situations where families get separated, you have to make that hard choice, and then there's maybe 1 or 2 children that can't come into the shelter with you because of their age. What happens to those children? Do they then go into foster care? Do they just end up on the streets or in a different facility? What happens to those children?
So the question that you mentioned, I'm just going to restate so everyone can hear. The question was, what happens when families are presented with there's a barrier that the child is too old that's in their household to get with them, to go with them into shelter? Okay, thank you. So again, repeating the question, what happens to the child if the individual is over the age of, admittance to get into a shelter? So for us, the situation that I've become aware of, the parent generally has to make a decision to not accept that shelter, because 9 times out of 10, they don't want to be able to separate from their families. Now, in some other incidents, I've learned that if they may have a family member, they can just take one of them, and then that particular older child can go stay with a family member or a friend. Those are some options that they resolve to, but again, ultimately, they want to keep their family together. And so although they're going through a very trying situation, ultimately, they still want to stay together.
As those that provide the resources for the homeless, what is your biggest need?
So the question is, as a resource for the homeless, what is one of our biggest needs? I'll just start briefly. Working with individuals with mental illness, some with substance abuse, others just dealing with physical ailments. We get financial resources from the government to assist in subsidizing their rent once we're able to get them ready. But I would say like MARTA, transportation, these are that you can use for unrestricted funds and resources. So if people are able to donate things such as laundry kits, things that can be packed together, those type of donations I know that are a lot of times appreciated. Dry goods, I know food pantries are available, but sometimes just being able to put those packets together, and when you're going out in the community, our outreach workers can take those items to individuals.
Okay, and along with that, so financial resources or material things, toiletries are all great, but it seems like so much of this is about relationship, like you said.
Sure.
And so if you had all the money you needed, kind of what's that what is the vision? What gets homelessness handled in a way that is humane and deserving of, like you said, human beings?
So, and I'm in the midst of COVID right now. There were so many things pre-COVID that I would have been able to respond to. So many things I would have been able to respond to, I would say, pre-COVID. But a lot of things that really were helpful when people would come out, and what we did was just write little love notes to share. When we put food boxes together, we were able to have those little gentle notes, put in the actual food boxes that we would take out and be able to assist. So just simple things. And I'm trying to be mindful, given the situation in regards to social distancing, and trying to be mindful large groups of people not coming together. So it has, unfortunately, altered the way that we would like to do things. But I know Beck, in regards to how she organizes the community support that comes through Gateway and their community over there, because, again, it's a big extension that hits a lot of the individuals on the streets of Atlanta. So I'll turn it over to see if you have any suggestions. I know you've done some very creative things.
Yeah, and I want to make space for the gentleman over here to respond to the question as well. There's a lot of different ways. We always need money, and we need money that's unrestricted. Oftentimes, grants come with starting a new initiative, which sounds awesome and edgy and cool. But how do we sustain the programs that we already have, that we know that are working, that we have the numbers that say this is working? How do we get those resources? So unrestricted funds. And then next, contact the local place before you ever start a donation drive, because, it might be that time of the year where we get 50,000 tampons, and then I don't need any more, right? Or maybe we need underwear, or maybe we need soap. So just reach out to your local agency and find out. Next thing, you said something about ending homelessness. And that was language that we used in America probably for about 15 years in most of the service agencies, like we were going to end homelessness. But we started realizing that there's a lot of systematic issues that, if we think of like justice as a river, like a lot of our service agencies are pulling people out of this river, right, trying to save them from drowning. But we weren't going upstream to see what was causing all of these things. So we need to start tackling some of these causations. And then while we can build more shelters, we're ultimately just warehousing people if we don't have affordable housing stock. And for those of you who live inside the perimeter, you know that the cost of housing is just rising, right? I can't get a shack in Carrollton for $450 anymore. Like, it just doesn't happen. So what are alternative ways that we can house people? What are creative means of housing? Those are things that we need to be talking about in churches and in the nation and in our communities. And then lastly, on ending homelessness, there's a verse. This was the only thing that I heard about the poor growing up in church, was the poor you will have with you always. And it was sort of said to silence anybody who might be a little bit radical. But what Jesus is really saying is that we should have an attitude in which we always accept everyone with dignity and love, no matter their socioeconomic status or their status in the empire, right? So if they're a person that's voiceless, or a person with a lot of voice or a lot of clout, they should be welcomed into our community.
Thank you. So from a street perspective, or from a citizen connecting with the homeless person, what I would like to say is just pay attention to what they're asking for. And I heard a story where a young homeless man, yes, can you hear me now? Okay, so what I was saying is paying attention to them. And I've heard a story of a young homeless man that was outside a store holding a sign asking just for money so that he can purchase a toothbrush. People were not reading the sign, and they were just bringing him food. So he had a bunch of bags of food. At the end of the day, he didn't have money to buy the one thing that he was asking for. So don't assume. Just pay attention to what they're saying. Pay attention to what they're asking. And another thing, some people, as I said before, they have dignity. We have to treat them with respect, and don't simply assume that because they're homeless, they're asking for, I don't want to say this, but a handout. Sometimes we even get calls saying, well, there's an aggressive homeless woman. I try to give her a meal, and she yelled at me. Well, sometimes they also get offended. If they're not asking for anything, just respect them. Not just because they look homeless, dirty, it means that they're in need of something. So just kind of pay attention to the little details. Don't always assume. And I think one of the big themes has been dignity and respect. So they're humans, and they also have feelings. They get offended when they're not asking for anything and people just go and give them stuff. As I mentioned before, if you don't feel comfortable giving money, you can give them clothing, you can give them socks. Socks is the number one valuable thing that they want. You can give them gift cards. You can even purchase MARTA cards so that they can get to these services. They can use for transportation purposes. And I know, as we mentioned before, homelessness is something that we might not be able to ever eliminate, but it's good, as Mr. Lora said, it's good to find the root cause of the problem. Otherwise, these services, this help will simply serve as a band-aid to an injury that it's greater. It's just a band-aid. If you remove that band-aid, it's going to continue. But if we can find the root cause and help treat that, and oftentimes is drug addiction, a mental illness, but many times they will know when it's time to seek help. Let's not try to solve their problems. Let's not just go up, walk to the homeless and say, hey, they're hiring over there. You need to get a job. Let's not do that. They'll be ready, and they'll do that once they're ready. Let's listen to them and not try to solve their problems. I think that's all I have for now.
If there was a question in the back before I go to you, I think that we should ask the question, how can we prevent homelessness instead of how we can end homelessness? I think that there's a difference between those two questions, and we should be able to address the emergency of homelessness right now, but also we should be able to address the prevention of homelessness. And so, just to make sure that we got that difference in mind. How can we prevent it instead of how can we end it?
I have two questions real quick. How can someone get their disability documented if it wasn't documented before being homeless when you were talking about chronic homelessness?
If it wasn't?
Yes, if it wasn't documented before, so they had the disability but they were never documented beforehand.
The question that you asked is, how can a person who may have had a disability before they became homeless get it documented? So as part of the resources, once they actually get connected with services, we're able, and we actually have staff that work to support that individual and actually connecting. So whether they have a licensed clinical social worker or a medical doctor, they are part of the support staff, and so they're able to connect them to complete the diagnosis, and or sometimes just tracking down doctors' records and those kind of things that they may have tapped into prior to becoming homeless. And so that's just a matter of accessing resources and support from the case management, and what we like to call them as housing navigators in the city of Atlanta. And your second question?
What would you recommend to a teacher to do if one of their students is homeless, besides, the normal things we have to do is follow DPACs?
So the question that I hear you saying is, how as a teacher would you want to be able to help connect a child that you become aware that they're homeless? And I'll just start because I know that we work with the school social workers, as well as they also have homeless liaisons within the different counties and school systems. What is really, really important is a lot of times, like you said, the hidden homeless, sometimes they won't automatically identify because they're embarrassed. But some of the resources I can share with you, even as a teacher, if you connect them with, say, the counselor, and then they will be able to connect them with that designated homeless liaison that works within the school system. And they will be able to make sure that that family has access to resources, whether it's transportation or whatever the issue may be. And a lot of times, some of the signs may be attendance. They look at that, as well as if the kids are wearing the same type of clothing, because all schools don't have the requirement to wear uniforms, or if they have a requirement to wear uniforms and that particular child can't afford it. And so there's government resources aside and allocated, the HUD McKinney, to help ensure that individuals do not have to be forced. And so if the school can't provide that resource to pay for those uniforms or afford transportation, they'll bring it to them. And so that's just a resource that's available. And so again, using your current support systems on site at the school, starting with the counselor, is definitely a good resource.
Thank you for that question. Thank you so much, because I want to address everybody in that regard, is that the school are very limited to release information because of all the regulations. But you can go anonymously and ask the school, what can I do to help the homeless students that you have? And they can give you a list of things. You will never know the students just because of the rules. They cannot show you or introduce you to the student, but you can do it anonymously. So I encourage you, like for Christmas, if you want to do something for somebody who will never know that you did it, who the person will help them, go to your local school and ask, how can I help? Because there's a lot of needs, just like transportation is one, especially in high school. They might be missing classes just because they don't have a way to get there. So Uber gift card, Marta gift card, what it's something like that. But I just encourage you to go to the school, to the local school, and ask, how can I do it? Especially now that the year is ending. If they are coming to school, they will not have the resources. They will not have the lunches that they get in school. So how, those questions, how can they be feeding, getting food during the summer? So I just encourage you to go to your local school and ask a simple question: what can I do to help your homeless students?
You had a question, Renee?
I did. You mentioned the one of the barriers being not having an ID. So can a homeless person get an ID, or if they can't, what can they do?
There's several resources inside the city of Atlanta, and I'm sure there's some in North Fulton and South Fulton that can be connected to, but inside the city of Atlanta, there's several organizations that assist people with documentation, as well as being able to sign a waiver to keep that copy of that documentation on file. So these are agencies like Central Outreach and Advocacy, Crossroads Community Ministries, and Emmaus House in the city of Atlanta. So they assist people, they have vouchers, they're able to get it expedited. Many cities works to get people birth certificates from out of state. So there are many agencies that their whole niche, I guess you'd say, is helping with documentation.
I just wanted to also add, for our particular program, we also have an emergency shelter for single women and women with children. If they have a Social Security card or a printout or a copy of it, that'll at least allow us to start the process. Of course, because we get federal funding, it does require us to have some way to prove that they actually have a Social Security card, but that's one thing that they can accept outside of actually having picture ID. And another option for people that sometimes they don't realize, a voter registration card is also helpful, and it's a little easier to access, and it's something they can use.
I know we just have a couple minutes, maybe not enough time for questions, but just on another thing when it comes to barriers that we did not discuss. One of those is gender as well. So in the city of Atlanta, we have a very small percentage of persons who are non-gender binary or trans. They will, if their birth sex is different from what they now identify, sometimes they'll go to a service center and they'll be denied services. So that's a barrier that we have. As well as some agencies will not allow someone who is not an American citizen to stay at their facility. So these are also things that we need to consider. And as people of faith who care deeply and love each and every person, we need to make sure that agencies are caring and loving for every person.
Yes. Speaking of the barriers and for the transgender and the LGBT community, are y'all aware of any recently new resources for shelters that will take in unmarried couples? Even the Capitol, the Lora doesn't take, I mean, that's individual, the hotel that's doing the emergency shelters, where I have clients, like they're under the bridges, and when they come out, there's a team now that they're coordinating with the city before they clear under the bridge and the rocks underneath there, that they'll offer services to get into the hotel, but I just clients won't go because they don't want to leave their apartment.
Well, let's put an ellipses on this and come back to that question because it is 10:50 and I want to honor everybody's time. This is an amazing question, so we will talk about that too.